The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon. My name is Melissa Mata. I'm the Municipal Research Analyst for the Colorado Municipal League. I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar. It's the first installment of our election series as we prepare for the April 2022 elections, and we're excited to kick it off today. Our presentation today is on the election calendar for both polling place and mail ballot elections. Today's webinar is being recorded. We will post it on our website along with the PowerPoint slide deck. We ask for about 24 hours to get that posted, so you can look for it tomorrow. Attendees of today's webinar may also apply for 1/2 credit with CMCA, that's the Colorado Municipal Clerks Association. To apply for that credit, you'll need to complete and submit an assessment form. I'll explain exactly how to do that at the end of today's session. I just wanted to make sure you knew up front that the credit will be available. Now, for those of you new to the GoToWebinar format, you should see a control panel to the right of your screen. And to minimize the panel, you can click the orange arrow on the left-hand side of the box, which is actually a white arrow in an orange box, but there is a question box in your control panel as well. So we do encourage questions throughout the presentation. I will actually be interrupting our presenter as we go to make sure they get asked, so go ahead and ask throughout. And while our presenter today needs no introduction, I will still say a sentence or two before handing the mic over. Karen Goldman, MMC, currently runs the Municipal Clerk Advisor Program, which was created by CML, CIRSA, and CMCA as a free service to assist municipal clerks with specific job-related questions or challenges. Karen has 20+ years of experience as both a municipal clerk and a municipal clerk trainer. So CML would like to express our sincere appreciation to Karen for her help in editing this year's election book, and not just the 2021 version actually, but previous versions as well. We also want to say thank you for hosting the election webinar series and for supporting clerks through both one-on-one assistance as well as through participation in the listserv. So thank you very much, Karen, for all that you do. And with that, I'll go ahead and kick it over to you.
Thank you, Melissa. Let me do my technical piece here. There I am. I hope everybody can see me, and I want to say welcome to the first of 5 webinars sponsored by CML to talk about the upcoming election in April of 2022. So the topic for today is how to create an election calendar. You see, it's the fundamentals of election calendar. And before I get started, just like to talk a little bit about creating a calendar. So every year before an election cycle, 1 or more municipal clerks goes out on the listserv asking for someone to provide them with an election calendar that they've created that they can use. And clerks, being the fabulous and helpful people that they are to their colleagues, often provide it. As I watch this, I find that I get a little bit disturbed. That's the word I'm going to use, disturbed by this exchange. And I want to tell you why. What I find very interesting about being a municipal clerk is we are one of the few professions where we actually learn how to do our jobs after we get the position. A lot of other jobs, you know, you go to school, you take law courses or medical courses or other types of things, but I always found that because we come from a variety of different disciplines, the actual techniques and the actual responsibilities of doing our job are learned by doing them. So in my opinion and in my way of thinking, creating an election calendar should be treated exactly the same, because remember, ultimately the entire responsibility for the election rests with you. If you do a great job, huzzah. But if you don't do a good job or you miss some kind of legal deadline, then that's on you as well. And, you know, it's the old story about, you know, give a man a fish or teach a man to fish, and you know how it goes. So I really believe that the best way to learn something is by doing it. Now, that's not to say that you shouldn't ask other clerks for copies of their calendars so that you can compare what you have done with what they have done. But remember, every municipality is slightly different. Every election is slightly different. And what might be included in somebody else's election calendar may not need to be included in yours. So my suggestion would be create your own, and we're going to talk today about how to do that. And after you've created your own, then ask, go to your neighboring clerk or go out on the listserv, ask for copies, and just see how everything goes. Okay, enough of being on a soapbox, but I wanted to make sure I got that out of the way. So let me talk a little bit about the way this presentation has been structured. In past years, when we've talked about an election calendar, I've gone through the step-by-step, date-by-date listing of everything you need to know to create an election calendar. I am not going to do it this time, and here's why. Here is, let's see, let's get it. Here's the election book, okay? Trying to figure out the angle on my camera. This is the election book. And if you'll notice, there is a section in the election book, sorry, I'm moving it around, on how to create the calendar. And this particular booklet does do that. So rather than repeat what's in the book, I'm going to encourage you to read it and get that information. But instead, what we're going to talk about today is what I call the fundamentals of an election calendar, the things you need to think about when you create your calendar, and we'll have a conversation with that. So I'm going to ask Melissa as we go along to go to the next slide. And as we said, if there are questions that you have, go ahead and type them in and we will answer them in real time. And I really do hope this is an interactive type of presentation. So with that, Melissa, can we get to the next slide, please?
Yes, and I would like to say I have received a couple of questions about how to get their hands on the election book.
Okay.
So I'll let everyone know now. We actually have a slide at the end all about how to get your hands on an election book. So I will cover it at that time, and it'll be on your screen. But I just wanted to make sure people realize that so that they weren't still concerned about it and they could focus on what we say.
Okay, sounds great.
With
Thank you.
Here, the next.
Okay, so the first thing I want to do is to get you prepared for creating your calendar. So here's what I suggest. You want to get calendar pages on hand, either paper copies or online. I'm old school. I use paper whenever I can. And so what I would do is I would get one piece of paper for each of the months from January through April at a minimum, and I would use that to identify the important dates, and I'd have that available at all time. The second thing you need to do, and believe me, I was teased unmercifully at conference, or at our conference, because this is what I always say. You want to review and become familiar with the laws governing elections. You cannot do your job unless you know what the job entails. And where you're going to find that information is in the statutes. So we've got Title 31, Article 10 is the Colorado Municipal Election Code of 1965. If you're new to elections and have never read it, go ahead and read it. And like I like to say, is again and again and again. And if you haven't had an election in a long time, go ahead and read it. And even if you have, go ahead and read it, because it's likely that some things have changed since the last time you read it. So in addition, so you want to go ahead and read that. And there are other materials that you want to read. There is the election book, which I just mentioned. There's also information if you've got a ballot issue, a Tabor issue on your ballot, in addition to your candidate elections. You want to make sure you're familiar with the provisions of Tabor. Those can be found in both the Colorado Constitution and in Title I. And I think all of you by now should probably have received the 2021 Red Book, the Colorado Revised Statutes. The other thing that I suggest you do is to contact your county clerk for the following reasons. First of all, you want to find out if there are any Acaba covered voters residing within your municipalities. UACAVA stands for Uniformed Overseas Citizen Absentee Voter Act. These people are basically military. They're family members who are registered to vote within your municipality but are not residing within your municipality. They could also be people who are working in other states or other countries. They might even be students who are going to college in other particular states. And the reason you want to know this is because in every election that is conducted within a municipality, there is a requirement to send ballots out to these voters, and they register with your county clerk. But there is a requirement, and the ballots are sent out 45 days before the day of the election. So even if you only have 2 or 3, you need to find out if you have any, because if you do, then you're going to have to do a special mailing and an early mailing for these UACAVA covered voters. The other thing you want to do with the county clerk is the county clerk in statute has a responsibility to provide you with voter registration lists for your use in the election. Now, it isn't free. They're going to charge you for it, and I think generally the going rate is $25. If you can negotiate a free one, good for you. But I do know that most municipalities or county clerks will charge you that same rate that they will charge a political party or a candidate or anybody else for a voter list. And when we talk about the voter list, be aware that the dates for providing voter lists are different depending upon the type of election that you are running, whether it's going to be a mail ballot election or a polling place election. And then the last thing I think is really important is to contact the county clerk's office to find out what their availability is on election day. In other words, can a staff member be available from the time the polls open on election day to the time the polls close, in the event that somebody walks into your office wanting to register to vote, which is legal. People can now register to vote up to and including election day, but we don't actually register them. We might provide them with a form, which you would then send to the county. The county would have to input the person into the database, let you know the person is officially registered, so that person could then vote. We don't have that ability to do that, and we have no provisional ballots in municipal elections under state statute. Now, just a caution, the county clerks are currently involved in the procedure of doing redistricting for their county precincts now that the state house and Senate districts have been established by the redistricting commission. So they are very, very busy. And I know that some municipalities have asked their county clerks for help in April, and they've been denied because they are so busy. So just be aware that you may not get as much help from your county clerk this time as you've had in past years, but at the very least, they need to provide you with this type of information.
And Karen, we have a question. When it comes to the UACAVA voters that you're looking for, can you confirm that you're only asking for active UACAVA voters?
If you are running a mail ballot election, you would only look for active. But if you are doing a polling place election, you would ask for all UACAVA covered voters.
Oh, well, that was a very good question to ask because it depends. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. All right, next slide, please. Sorry, as I fix my chair. All right, so in order to determine specific dates for your election, here's just something very, very general. Election day, I call day 0. So when you got your calendar out and you're looking at, I think it's April 5th, you put a 0 in somewhere in the corner of April 5th. And then as you're counting backwards, closer to the first of the year, the day before the election would be 1, 2 days before would be 2, and you would just keep putting numbers down on every day of the calendar where election day is day 0, and you want to at least go out 91 days. And then when you're counting forwards, when you're moving from election day into the end of April and into May and that kind of thing, again, the election day is day 0, and day 1 would be the day after the election, and you keep going, and you do this for every single day. Oops, there we go. Every single day on the calendar. Okay, and that will help you. So, and the reason you want to do that at the very beginning is so when you read what has to be done on a particular day, it keeps you from having to go and count every single time for every single action. And believe me, I've done that before, and you don't want to do that. The other thing I want to remind you is you need to pay attention to the following phrases, which you will find in state statute. If it says that something needs to be done prior to the 14th day before the election, the prior day will be day 15. If it says something will be done no later than day 14, the drop dead date is day 14. If it says that something can happen not early, or no earlier than or not later than day 14, the day you begin is on the 14th day. And then the word before, I think, is, understandable. And you're going to find all of these phrases in state statute. So it's very important to pay attention to these words and figure out what the words mean. Next slide, please. Okay. More general procedures. You want to count all calendar days. Now you'll never see in statute a phrase that says 14 calendar days. It'll say calendar days. What you will see is if they mean business days, the word business will be in statute. So calendar days means every single day, including weekends and holidays. And if the deadline does happen to fall on a weekend or on a holiday, statute deals with it. And here's how they do it. If anything having to do with the nomination petition process, which we're going to cover in the next webinar, including amending a petition, withdrawing their petition once they filed one, becoming a write-in candidate, if any of those happen to fall on a weekend or a holiday, the last day you do it is the preceding Friday. Now, the good news is the nomination petitions go out and come back on a weekday, as does the amendment process. So this doesn't happen very often. But there are some times where, and not necessarily in the nomination petition process, but there are some times when you're dealing with citizen petitions that the deadline for filing a petition or doing something with the petition ends on a day that your office isn't open because your governing body or your town has a 4-day work week, or maybe there's a shortened work day, and maybe on that particular day it closes at 2, or you're not there on a Friday. If the date for filing or doing something happens to be on a date that your office is closed, it's not a weekend, it's not a holiday, so that means that at least your office will need to remain open in order for somebody to complete the process, because they have the right to all the time frames that they are eligible to do whatever it happens to do. But as I said, we're lucky that with the nomination procedures, that's not an issue. So moving on, so that's anything to do with the nomination process. But if any other procedure not having to do with the nomination procedure falls on a weekend or a holiday, like in the old days, it was registering to vote for whatever reason, the last day to register to vote always wound up being on a weekend. Then you had one more day that wasn't a weekend in order to complete the process. So these are just things that you need to keep in mind. Okay.
And we have a question. I think it's referencing a previous slide when talking about registering to vote on election day. So if someone comes into the polling place and they're not registered to vote, can they go online at that time to register, or do they need to go to the county clerk's office? What's the process there?
Okay, well, the answer is no, they cannot go online. And if your community happens to be the county seat, and there's a county clerk's office that is, in the same town across the street or down the block or whatever, they can certainly go to the county office and register to vote. But the best way to do it is for you to have a paper form, voter registration form, and I think they're still available, and have the person fill it out, and then you would fax that information or email that information to the county clerk. When you talk to the county clerk and ask them if they're going to be available on election day, you also want to make sure you ask them, if somebody comes into my office to register to vote, how do I get that information to you so that you can register them to vote? But online registration ends 8 days before an election. Now, if the county clerk says it's okay to register online before a municipal election, then you follow their procedure. But normally, online registrations end 8 days before the day of an election.
Perfect, thank you.
All right, so next slide, please. Okay, when you create your calendar, you're going to find that there's a lot of things in state statute that are involved in an election, but may not be involved in your election. So don't put anything in your calendar that is not relevant to your election. I'll give you a good example on the first one. So the first thing is you only include dates for procedures that you are actually going to do. And here's a great example. State statute says that if you're going to change your precincts, you have to do it 90 days before the day of the election. So there are many people who put that in their calendar. Well, guess what? Statutory towns do not have precincts. Everybody's elected at large. So there is no reason why you would change anything, and therefore there is absolutely no reason why you must include that date in your election calendar. So only the procedures that you're doing. Okay, and again, only include dates that pertain to the form of the election. Here's another example. The nomination petition circulation timeframes are 91 days before the day of the election is when you start, and you end 71 days before the day of the election. And that's true regardless of the election you're holding. But if you're holding a mail ballot election and you want to put the citation into your calendar, and a lot of people will do that, so that if somebody says, well, why is it this date, you can go back to the statute and let them know. So if you're doing a mail ballot election, just put in the citation for mail ballot elections and don't put in the citation for a polling place election. Likewise, if you're a mail ballot election, and generally you don't have absentee ballot requests, so you don't necessarily need to put in the deadlines for allowing people to begin applying for absentee ballots or ending the deadline. Now, if you think you might get absentee ballots in addition to mail ballots, in other words, people for some reason very suddenly are not at their mail ballot address in the voter registration database, and they've had to fly somewhere and they need to get their ballot somewhere else, you can include that. But if you know from past experience you don't get any absentee ballots, there's no reason to do it. So the point I'm making is don't clutter up your calendar with things that are not relevant and not pertinent. The other thing that I suggest you do is including preparation dates along with actual dates. For example, the nomination petitions for the April election are available, and I'm just going off the top of my head, I think it's January 4th. let's say you want to make sure you have them all ready to go. So you set yourself a deadline of December 22nd to make sure that the petitions and the petition packets are ready to go. That's what I call a preparation date. Another good example of it is, you know, the date for having to post notice of your election in the newspaper. So you put down the date it's going to appear in the newspaper. But in a lot of places, you have to send that notice so many days before the date of the publication. That to me is a preparation date. And you want to make sure you include that in your calendar, because remember, this calendar is for you and it's for you to use. Some people I've seen identify the entity responsible for the action. So for example, the date that the county clerk provides you with a voter list. And what they'll do is sometimes people will highlight the date or the name of the entity in a different color other than black ink. Maybe they'll use, red for the county or green for the governing body or something like that. And that's something that you can do as well, so that visually you can see exactly who's supposed to do what and when. And then that goes to the next point about, so I've already said that, and identifying, and then include all relevant post-election dates. Now, some people just think the election's over, I'm done. That's not true. If you're doing a mail ballot election, there are deadlines for receiving overseas ballots. There are deadlines for receiving letters from people whose signatures you can't match to the voter registration information. There is the canvass date. There's the recount dates. God forbid if you have to do a recount. There is a, protesting the election date, although I've never seen anybody do it. So, I mean, your calendar needs to go past the election. And there's post-election campaign reporting dates as well. So these are the kinds of things that you want when you're creating your calendar that I want to make sure that you think about.
And we do have a question, Karen.
Yes.
How close to the election should the voter registration list be obtained? And what happens when you've already received the list and there are now new registered voters for the list?
Okay. So let's talk about it in two parts. For the Acaba, if you have Acaba voters and you need to send those ballots out 45 days before the day of the election, then you need to contact your county clerk, ask for only those, and make sure you have them as close to that 45-day period as possible. You may contact the clerk in advance and say, how many do I have? So you'll know to prepare the ballots, because there's return envelopes and there's instructions and there's all that are a little different from either your mail ballot instructions or your polling place instructions. So you want to be fairly close to the 45 days. Now in polling place elections, you really only need to have the voter list just a few days before the day of the election. And I don't think, I'm not sure if in statute, again, I can't remember, in statute, you probably want to have a list after 22 days before the day of the election. And the reason I say that is because in order to vote in an election, you have to be a resident of the state 22 days before the day of the election. So anytime after 22 days would be a good time, but as close to the election as possible would be a good idea. And you need to find out also from the county clerk, in order to get you a list, how much lead time do they need? So if you contact them on a Thursday and they say, well, I can't get it to you until Monday, I need 2 days to put your list together, you need to build that into your request for a calendar. Now, in a mail ballot election, there are statutory deadlines for sending, providing calendars for mail ballot. And then if you have a list, if you have somebody and they come in to vote at a polling place and you don't find them on the list, there's a couple things you can do. You can use your DEO access, which you get through the Secretary of State's office, and we can talk about that later, to see if they are currently registered, and they registered, you know, after the list. You can call the county clerk to find out if they have record of registration. So there are all kinds of ways to do it. You've got to remember that registration is a dynamic action, and the lists really are dynamic. You know, I always like to say that as soon as you put something in print and you print it off, it's out of date. And especially that's true with voter registration lists. So hopefully that gives you some idea of what you need to do. If not, ask the question again and we'll do some more clarification.
Okay, and the next question is pertaining to the write-in affidavit of intent. It says it has to be filed 65 days prior. So does that mean they cannot file it on the 64th day?
Okay, we'll talk about this again next time, but let me answer it. Let me answer it now. There is a provision in state statute that says that unless you want to allow people to decide on election day that they want to be a write-in candidate, and if you want to know who your write-in candidates are, then the governing body needs to pass an ordinance that basically talks about write-in candidates and also canceling the election. So in order to cancel an election, I'm going to work backwards. In order to cancel election, you need to have the same number of candidates, or the same or fewer number of candidates as there are positions to be voted on. And you have to, and that includes write-in candidates. And then the other part is that if you give the people a deadline to be a write-in candidate, then those affidavits figure into the count of how many candidates you have running for the position. And I hope I said that in a way that people understand it. Absent that ordinance, and I think by now most municipalities do have that ordinance in place. Absent that ordinance, a person, even let's say you have, you have 3 people up, not your mayor, but you have 3 people positions available, and you have 3 people who've turned in petitions, and the petitions are sufficient, but you don't have this ordinance that requires a deadline for filing an affidavit of intent to be a write-in candidate. That means that you still have to have an election, even though you have the same number of people if you have positions, because you haven't restricted anybody's ability to decide on election day they want to write in their name. Now that's how it works. Now to go back and answer your questions, the deadline is the deadline. If the deadline to file a write-in candidate is 64 days, and you have that ordinance that requires it, if they decide later they want to be a write-in candidate, it's too late, because I also, and you'll read this in the election book, there's no reason for a blank line because they wouldn't be qualified, and therefore you wouldn't count their votes. So whoever asked that question, if you need more clarification, let me know. But
she says, so they can do it on the 64th day?
What is the, and what is the length? Does it say prior to the 64th day? I don't know. I don't have the statute book in front of me.
She says,
but
yes.
Okay,
prior
if it's
the 64th day is what.
Right, so if it says prior to, remember what I said earlier, if it says prior to the 64th day, the deadline is the day before the 64th day. That's why it's really important to pay attention to those words.
Okay.
Okay. Perfect. And you keep going if for clarification, but let's move on to the next slide, and we can always come back to that.
Okay, sounds good. Next slide.
Okay, so I'm hoping that I haven't left anything out. But here are the types of things when you're having a polling place election that you want to include on your election calendar. And the one thing I don't have in here are what I call the preparation dates, because that's going to vary from person to person. Some people are really good with a short, time frame. Other people like to get things done well in advance of when they need it. So it's up to the individual to decide what those dates are, but keep that in mind. So here's the thing of a calendar. Nomination petition circulation time frame, 91 to 71 days before the day of the election. The dates for amending the nomination petition, for withdrawing from nomination. And what that means is somebody's filed a petition. The petition has been certified as valid. They change their mind. They wake up and they say, I don't know what I was thinking. I don't know why I did that. I want to withdraw. They do it in writing. It's notarized. And then you treat the petition as if it never came in, and also becoming a write-in candidate. Those dates. And they're all pretty close to one another because those things occur, and then you can decide if you can cancel an election, which is the next item, the date to cancel the election. When absentee ballots can be applied for, and remember, the absentee ballots must be requested on a written application form. When you're going to appoint the election judges in a polling place election, it's no later than 15 days before the day of the election. So you want to figure that date. Now, it doesn't mean you have to wait till 15 days. It's no later than. The date for publishing and posting your notice of election. And again, this is where a preparation date would, not only the date that it's published or posted, but the date you have to get it to the newspaper, or the date you need to have it prepared to put on your website, those kinds of things. The date to mail out the Acaba ballots, 45 days before the day of the election. If people collect money or spend money in their campaign, the FCPA filing deadlines, 21 days before the election, Friday before, 30 days after, and then if they have money left over in their campaign, 1 year later on April 1st, because it's always the first day of the month in which the election was held in the previous year. The date to receive the voter list from the county clerk, and remember, as I said earlier, they're going to be different if you're doing a polling place election and a mail ballot election. The canvass date and the date to swear in the elected officials. Let me talk a little bit about that. On election night, if you have Acaba covered voters to whom you have sent ballots, law says that if they postmark their ballots on the day of the election, no later than the day of the election, and you receive them no later than the 8th day after the election, and that's another timeline something you want to put on your calendar, when the last day to receive them, then those ballots can be counted and added to whatever total you determined on election night, which is an unofficial total, okay? After that 8th day, and no later than 10 days after the election, you conduct a canvass, and you conduct it with your mayor, if your mayor was not on the ballot, or if he or she was, you can use a municipal court judge, or you can use a person who could have been an election judge, but wasn't in your election, and all you need to be an election judge is a registered elector anywhere in Colorado, and you perform a canvass, and it is a review of what the election judges did. It is not a recount. It is not a do-over. It is something that says, okay, we had 44 people came in. We had 43 ballots counted, which means somebody walked out with the ballots stuck in their shirt, and believe me, it happens. Of the 43, here was the vote for all of these people. The total wasn't, at large, it's hard to figure out the total, but here's what we did. Here's person A got this many, B got this many, C got this many. Here's how many absentee ballots we had. And basically you just review all the stuff that the judges did. And then that's a canvas. Then that is signed by you as the DEO and whoever assists you in the canvas. And then you send it along to DOLA. And I'm in the process of finding out exactly what is needed by DOLA in order. So what you're doing is you're recording the results with DOLA. And I'm going to find out exactly what type of information they want in order to accept it, because sometimes they don't accept it. They don't think it's enough information. Then and only then does the vote become official. Now, if you have no Acaba voters in a polling place election, then whatever you do on election night, once the vote is tallied, you're done, because everything, absentee ballots have to be received no later than the close of polls. You're not doing signature verification. You don't have to worry about that. So once you're done counting, it's official, and the canvass can be done that night. It is recommended that your elected officials do not get sworn in until after the votes are official. And I know for some municipalities, this is going to be a change. In the past, election is always on a Tuesday. The board meets on Wednesday or Thursday of the same week, and they swear in the new folks. That's fine if the results are official, but the vote could change if you have outstanding ballots you're waiting to hear from. Now, the other thing that you need to understand is any potential recount will not occur until after the vote is official. And I know, people look at the results on election night. I had this happen in November. Clerk called, and there was like a 1 vote difference, and there was a lot of, oh my God, what do we do? What do we do? And I said, well, first of all, you have to wait until you have the official results, which will be done tomorrow by the county clerks, and then you decide if you need a recount. So, just something to think about.
Okay, we have a question.
Sure.
When it comes to forms that need to be notarized, may I, the designated election official, notarize those forms, or should they go to someone else who is not the designated election official?
That is a decision that is pretty much up to you. I know in small communities, sometimes it's hard to find a notary outside of the clerk or the clerk's office. So if you decide you're going to notarize, I only say be consistent. Other places have enough notaries around that you don't need to do that. If you're worried, you have to kind of take the temperature of your community. If some things are really contentious and anything you do is highly scrutinized, and people think that notarizing, which is just an administrative act, is somehow an indication of bias or prejudice, then you may want to have somebody else do it. But I'll leave it up to you. I just say that whatever decision you make, be consistent and be sure that you do it the same no matter what or when.
Perfect, thank you. That's our only question for now. Shall I move to the next slide? Please
do, thank you. Okay, so in a mail ballot election, things are going to be very, very similar. The nomination petition circulation time period is the same, 91 days to start, 71 days to turn it to turn it in. The dates for amending the petitions are actually the same. Withdrawing and becoming a candidate, they are the same as well. The date to cancel the election is the same, but the appointment of election judges is slightly different. It still is 15 days, no later than 15 days before the day of the election. However, in a mail ballot election, by law, you and your judges can start processing and counting ballots 15 days before the day of the election. So it is my suggestion that if you're doing a mail ballot election, you hire your judges well in advance of the 15 days. Remember, it's a no later than 15 days type of thing, because you need to train them on how to do signature verification. You need to make sure they, understand the process for checking in ballots and doing the certification and in a mail ballot election. And if you are in a municipality that has a huge number of voters and you're expecting a big voter turnout, you want to get them started 15 days, the first day you can, to start processing the ballots, which means you're going to have to hire them before. I can't tell you when to do it. I just suggest you do it well in advance of that 15 days. Publishing and posting the legal notice is the same. The Acaba ballots are the same. The date to mail out the non-Acaba ballots is between 22 and 15 days before the day of the election. You've got the same FCPA filing deadlines. The voter list from the county, the dates are different. Now, the mail ballot procedures are in Part 9 of 31-10, and the title of Part 9 is paper ballots. And when we first put it in there, when we added mail ballot elections to the code, I asked the drafter why it was there, and she said, well, mail ballots are really paper ballots, so it made sense to be here. And I will tell you that if we ever get around to amending the municipal election code, I would like to put in a brand new section, maybe like a 9.5 for mail ballot elections. But you'll see when the section on mail ballot elections starts, and I think it's like 905 or 907, you'll see the deadlines, and there's a couple of deadlines where they'll send you one list and then they'll send you a supplemental list. And the supplemental list is exactly that, is a list of people who have registered to vote on a date after they sent you the first list. And you want to make sure that when you ask them for that supplemental list or remind them that they need to send it to you, that that's all you want is the additional signatures, not all over again, because that could be very confusing. The date to begin counting the ballots, as I said, is 15 days before the day of the election. The canvass date, the date to swear in the elected officials, is different. Now, the canvass date here will absolutely be 10 days after the election, no later than 10 days after the election, because my guess is that you're going to have at least one, if not more, ballots where the signature on the envelope cannot be compared to the signature in the voter registration base for a number of reasons. So need to keep those things in mind. So when you are created your calendars and you go to the listserv and say, I have created my mail ballot election calendar, or I have created my polling place election calendar, and you need to be very specific. And now I would like to see a similar calendar by which I can compare. As I said, make sure you identify the type of election you're having, because otherwise some extremely helpful clerk, and which is what I love about all of you, will send you something that you can't really use. Okay.
I have a few questions.
Sure.
So the 60th day is the day by which the county clerk shall give a list of the overseas voters. So when is the first day that the overseas ballots may be mailed?
45 days before the day of the election. So you basically have 15 days between the day the county clerk gives you the list of Acaba voters, and you have 15 days to prepare the ballots, get everything, the envelopes, the affidavit on the return envelope, the instructions, all that put together and mailed out. And the 45 days, you don't have to wait till the 45 days. You just can't do it after 45 days.
Okay, so when they send you it on day 60, if you're ready on day 59, you can put them in the mail on day 59?
Yes, you can. Now, and there may be people who register as Acaba covered voters after that list. That could happen. And so what you have to do is just as soon as you get any additional, let the county clerk know. If anybody else signs up, and in an April election, the chances of people doing it are not as high as for the November elections. So that may not happen. but alert the county and say, if you get any more after you sent the list, please send them to me ASAP, and then you mail them out as soon as you can.
Perfect.
So when you get those have those ballots printed up, if you know you have 15, don't just print 15 envelopes and stuff. Print a few more just in case.
Perfect. Next question. Is there a statute stating how much to pay a judge?
There is a very, I'm going to call it ridiculous statute because it says no less than $5. And then I says, you're not going to pay anybody $5. I always suggest that when you get your election judges, one of the best places to get a list of judges is to contact your county clerk and ask for their best judges. And if you're doing a mailed out election, especially ask if they've got people who are used to doing signature verification. And then you can create your list, but you don't have to use them. If you've got some really good people that you've used in the past, continue to use them. What I always recommend is that you ask the county clerk what the hourly rate is. And from what I hear, it's somewhere between $15 and $20, an hour. Some municipalities set a daily rate, but it can't be less than $5.
Perfect.
So, yeah.
Last question for now. Can the official ballot be printed in-house, or do you recommend an outside source?
Oh, you can do whatever you want. I have to send kudos out to Sean Hogan, who is the clerk in Larkspur. We had a vacancy election, we had a recall election, and he did all of the printing and the manipulating in-house, and he did a spectacular job. And you can do that, or you can use a print vendor. If you're going to use a print vendor, I suggest you contract with them as soon as you can, because the primary, state primary is the end of June, and they could be busy. I'm also told there's a paper shortage, one of those supply chain issues. But if you want to do it in-house and you only have a few voters, it would probably make economic sense to do that. But there is no requirement to do it one way or the other. It's basically what works for your community.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. Next slide.
Please. Now, in addition, so, also on your calendar, if you happen to have a Tabor issue, that if your governing body puts a Tabor issue on the ballot, that the other things you need to include are the deadlines, which are very specific for this. Remember, if you have Acaba covered voters, that's kind of your benchmark by which you're working to make sure that things work. So you would put in the date that the governing body refers it to the ballot, and they have to take affirmative action to put it on the ballot, and it can be done by resolution. Then you would identify the date that comments are due. Remember, if you have a Tabor notice, you created a ballot issue notice, and the date the comments are due, and the date the summary is created, and then the date the ballot issue notice is mailed out, which is 30 days before the day of the election, and it would include your preparation date. So basically the summary, the comments are due, I think, 45 days before the day of the election, the ballot, so you've got 15 days to put it all together and get it mailed out. So that's another consideration if you've got something on your ballot. And then next slide, please. Okay, so you've created the election calendar for yourself. And then I am also going to suggest that you create a separate election calendar for candidates and any issue committees that you may have. They don't need to know everything that you need to know, but they need to know certain things. So, and this kind of calendar would be something that you could include with the nomination petitions, and we will probably talk again about this at the next session, which is on the 9th of December. So a candidate election calendar should include, and again, I might have left some things off, the dates for circulating the petitions, the date for amending the petition, the date for, if you go to, the date for withdrawing, the Fair Campaign Practice Finance Report filing dates, The date you're going to swear somebody in if they're elected, I think that's important. The date for requesting a mandatory recount, which is, would be after the canvass, and then all that. And all this is in state statute. The date to make a legal contest to the election results, which quite honestly, I have, in all the years I've been working, I've never seen it. The date you can cancel the election, and you explain the circumstances, the date the ballots will be mailed out if you're doing a mailed out election. So basically, you let them know what the procedures are that they need to know about. But they don't need to know the date you're going to post the notice of the election in the newspaper. And they're not going to know the date you're going to prepare the nomination petitions. And they're not going to need to know the date you're going to hire the election judges. They just need to know, and I always think it's a good idea, the more information you can provide to them, the better off you're going to be. And then the next slide, which is the last slide, for issue committees. In other words, if something is on your ballot, in addition to the election of officers in April, and you've got an issue committee created to either support or oppose whatever on your ballot, these are the kinds of things that you can give to them so that, again, they have the information that they need. And a lot of it are similar to what you would give to the candidates. The pre and post-election campaign finance report deadlines, which are the same for candidates and committees, the date ballots are mailed out if you're doing a mail-out election, if it's a Tabor issue, the date for submitting comments, mandatory recount, the date you would conduct it, those kinds of things. So these are the types of things that you would want to include for issue committees. So that is my last slide, and I know Melissa's going to talk about a couple of other things, but I just want to ask, are there any additional questions? And again, if you think of something later, you can always contact me, okay?
Yes, and you can continue to type the questions in the question box while I go over the last couple of things regarding credits and the election book. And even if we hit time, we can still collect the questions and make sure they're addressed on the listserv or one-on-one with the clerk who asked. But before I do move on, I do have one question. Will one of the upcoming webinars talk about issue committees?
I'll have to go back and look, but we can certainly find a way to include it. And for whoever asked the question, if you have some specifics you'd like to know about issue committees, let me know. I know I've also talked about them in presentations I've done, like I did a conference on the Fair Campaign Practices Act. So, and those I know are available through the CMCA website. So again, if you have something that's very specific, let me know and I'll be happy to go over it with you.
Okay, and then do all municipalities need to hire election judges?
Yes. I mean, somebody's got to be an election judge because you do not want, you as DEO, designated election official, is a term that's used in coordinated elections. It means the person responsible for an election from the entity that is coordinating with the county clerk who's running the election on your behalf. We now use it, DEO. You as the clerk are the DEO. You are responsible for making sure all of the requirements for the election are carried out. You make all interpretations when there are questions. You kind of are the manager and the overseer. But you need election judges, and you need a minimum of 3 in a polling place election. And so there's no number that's designated in a mail ballot election, but we know we need at least 3 for signature verification. So if you have a lot of ballots, you might have several teams of 3. And yes, you hire the judges and you pay the judges for their time.
Should we pass a resolution for town council to accept an election schedule?
No, that's not required.
Perfect. Last election, we held back 10 votes, Was this due to Acaba, and do we still need to do this?
Yeah. So if you have Acaba voters in a polling place or mail ballot election, and you mail out the ballots to them, you have no way of knowing how many ballots are going to come back. Additionally, if you're in a polling place, mail ballot election, and you send out these letters to people because you haven't been able to verify their signatures, you have no way of knowing how many of those are going to come back for being counted. So this is a practice that the counties use, and this is a very good practice that we should use. You want to, on election night, not count a certain number of ballots. I always like to use an odd number, 5, maybe 7. A couple elections I've worked on recently, they used 5. They held out 5. They basically just didn't count them. They just put them back in the sealed ballot box, and they just let them go. They were checked in, they were signatures verified, but the ballots themselves were not counted. And the reason you do that is, let's say you have 10 Acaba voters. You've got your election results. Only one of those ballots come back. You mark the votes, and now the votes have changed. And so you not only know who that person was who voted, you know how they voted. And the idea is to preserve the secrecy of the vote and the ballot. I mean, if a person wants to tell somebody how they voted, that's one thing, but you don't want to be in a position where you actually reveal it. So if you take that one ballot that came back and you add it to the ones you set aside, and you count all of those at one time, you have no way of knowing whose ballot came from, which ballot came from whom, and how the person voted. So it is a very good practice to do that. So it's either for Acaba in a polling place, or and a mail ballot election, and also in a mail ballot election, Acaba and what I call discrepant signature letters.
Perfect. And it looks like a couple of questions that are coming in now are about signature verification, which I believe we'll go over in a future webinar. And since it is 102 and I want to get to the last 2 slides, again, if you keep typing questions, we can answer them after today's webinar. It shows us who asked, so we'll be able to get back to you. But first, let's see. So in order to get credit for each of these webinars that we're having this series, there is an assessment form that you will need to fill out. It is available at our website. To find it, it's our top menu at cml.org. One of the options is education and training. If you hover over it, you will see the option for clerks. Click on that. You'll find information about the webinar series, including links to sign up for future webinars. You'll also see the assessment form. Complete the form, submit it to Kathy Novak. That email address is on the form itself, so you don't have to memorize it right now. But also, like I said, there's the option to register for the future webinars. Those are the topics that we'll be going over in the coming months. And so hopefully we'll see you there. But again, it's half credit for each hour. So each webinar will get you a half credit that you attend. And then the last slide, as promised, the CML 2021 election book. We did we did mail a hard copy to each member municipality in early November. We put the attention to the clerk, but just in case you did not receive one, contact me, Melissa Mata, at mmata@cml.org, and I will correct that oversight. If you're just looking for more copies, you can purchase them at the CML store at our website. But the PDF version is actually free. So if you want more hard copies, you'll spend money just to pay for our printing costs. But the PDF version you can also download for free, and anyone who works for a municipality is a member. So you'll need to log into the CML website. That's how the website recognizes you're a member, and the cost is free for you. Add the PDF to your cart. This is the confusing part. You have to actually go through the purchasing process. So the charge is $0, which is how it's free, but the system actually needs to register that you quote unquote purchased it. that'll give you the link so that you can download the file. So you have a few options there. If you didn't receive the free copy, contact me. If you want to buy more, buy more. If you want to download the PDF, then pretend buy the PDF.
And
That
I
should
would, yeah, and I want to give a shout out to CML staff who actually created the format for this book. I think it's incredibly readable. It's fun, and I think they deserve a lot of credit for coming up with the way it's formatted. So kudos to Melissa and all the other staff, Leslie and everybody else who worked on that. So thank you.
We appreciate that. And we appreciate you, Karen, for all of your support of the clerks. As I mentioned earlier, this video was recorded, so we'll get it up on the website, that same place where I mentioned that you can see the future webinars, and we'll have both the video and the slide deck itself so that you can download it. And remember to take advantage of the other resources, the clerks listserv. Karen is very active on the clerks listserv. So are your fellow clerks who have lived what you are going through in this election season. Very helpful. So thank you everyone for attending. I'll download any questions we didn't get to hit today. Thank you, Karen, for presenting. And I'll just see if you have any closing thoughts before we end today.
No, and thank you, and I appreciate the clerks who are interested in this information, and I thank you for attending, and we'll hopefully see you at the next one on December 9th, and until then, have a wonderful holiday next week, and please, everybody, be safe and take care of yourselves.
Perfect. Thank you, Karen. Thank you, everyone. This concludes today's webinar.
Bye-bye.